maybe he does know something I don't know.
Yeah.
All right, now you guys can hear him, right? Talk.
Hello, can you hear me?
Okay, you guys can hear him now? Give a Y in the chat, yes?
Why?
That's a yes in the chat. He's calling from hell. Yeah, I'm pretty sure now they can hear you. Pretty sure. Okay, so just so the audience knows what we went over. I asked Dirk, does he believe evolution is a valid scientific theory? He said, what does he mean by valid? I said, well, for something to be considered a scientific theory, it has to meet the set of requirements. And he said, I guess. Mm-hmm. Is that where we left off?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so what is for something to be a scientific theory, what must it go through?
Well, it has to go through testing, which obviously it can't do. But what they're saying is that makes it valid is that it's falsifiable. So if it can be proven wrong, then
hold on a second. You said it has to be testable. Well, no.
It has to be testable or falsifiable.
Can there be a scientific theory that isn't the product of the scientific method?
Made by Tech.
It has to go through the scientific method. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
But that would include being falsifiable.
Okay,
so
and what's
I know where you're going with this.
What's the scientific method?
Observation, hypothesis, testing, peer review, theory, testing, and accepted theory.
Okay, and so in evolution, what's the observation?
The observation would be, was it morphological differences and then genetic similarities, I guess. So that would lead to the hypothesis. So
well,
the hypothesis
hold on a second.
Okay.
One step at a time.
Okay.
So you start with an observation. You see differences and similarities in different animals that exist, right? So you have differences and similarities, right?
You have differences and similarities. Differences being the distinction, right?
Wait, let's not forget about the distinction, because in the scientific method, you start with an observation, and you said the observation is differences and similarities in the creatures we see today, right?
Yeah.
And so in the scientific method, the question is what causes the phenomenon, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Right. So that comes later, though. I think that comes later.
No,
that's not part of the hypothesis. The hypothesis is just, I don't think so. That goes with theory. The hypothesis is just...
Dude, no, it doesn't.
It does.
No, look, I'll use a different example, okay? If I observe the symptoms of scurvy, right? And I said, oh, here's the observation. I see these symptoms that would be later called as scurvy, but I just see the symptoms. That's an observation. The question I would ask is what's causing these symptoms, right? And so right after you ask the question, what causes these symptoms, you introduce something that you think is actually producing the symptoms. That's your hypothesis.
Right. So that would be, you could make that hypothesis. The hypothesis could be as simple as these are from the same proximal origin. So you don't have to...
No, it's begging the question, dude. No, that's
no. Hold on.
Worded.
Can I just let me finish? In the hypothesis, you don't need to say why it's happening.
Oh, you don't?
No.
So if I say what's causing scurvy, to do science, I don't actually need to posit what's actually causing scurvy.
Not until you get to the theory, because the hypothesis is to identify if there is something actually worth testing.
How do you get to a theory without a hypothesis that's viable, dude? Because
hypothesis is just the beginning parts of the theory. So
you don't get a workable you don't listen,
theory.
Bro. You're not a good listener. No, you're not listening, and you're avoiding the question. How do I determine what's causing scurvy if I don't have a viable hypothesis to test the X that's causing the Y?
Right. I understand what you're saying. So let me explain. A hypothesis could include an explanation of why, but it does not have to in the hypothesis.
To be a valid scientific theory, you're positing the likely explanation for what causes the actual phenomenon, dude. That's what makes
that's what makes it a theory. So after the hypothesis are examined by peer review,
dude, you're contradicting yourself.
I'm not.
You are.
Then people formulate a theory.
You just said, dude,
you're confusing hypothesis.
No, Dirk. No, I'm not. You need a hypothesis to test in order to produce a theory. Yes?
You do not need...
Contradiction.
I'm sorry.
Contradicting yourself, dude.
No, hold on.
You don't know what you're saying.
You need a hypothesis to get to a theory.
Good. Yes. You just contradicted yourself.
No, I did not.
You just said you didn't
need it. In the
hypothesis,
you do not need a cause.
Oh, really?
So
what's a hypothesis? What's a hypothesis then if it's not a cause?
It's a possible explanation of an
explanation
occurrence.
Of what?
Of an occurrence.
Yeah, what causes the occurrence, right?
It's not saying what's causing it, it's saying what there is a difference. So if I said, no, hold on. If I say there is a lizard with webbed feet and a lizard without webbed feet, and I say they come from the same origin, that's a hypothesis.
No, it's not.
I haven't said why. Yes, it is.
No, it's not, dude.
Yes, it is.
I'll tell you why that's not a viable hypothesis.
It is a valid hypothesis.
No, you take two things that look similar and you're positing that they have a shared ancestor, right?
Right.
So you're saying a shared ancestor caused them to be similar, right?
No, the shared ancestor is not what caused. Well, I'm sorry. You don't know what you're saying. No, I thought you said different. The shared ancestry is what makes them similar.
That's a cause, right?
That is not a cause. It is not.
You're literally a sophist. You're literally a sophist.
It's not causing them to be similar. Distinction is what is caused. What? Similarity is not a cause.
Are you a burnout? Distinction is not a cause. If I make a distinction between an elephant and a hypothesis, there's nothing. You can't say making a distinction between two things is a cause.
No, I'm saying if one animal becomes a different animal as per evolution,
question begging.
That would be
That would
needs
have
to be
a cause. That needs to be proven. Dirk, that needs to be proven. You just assumed that an animal becomes another animal. That's the thing in question.
In our argument, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, for the sake of argument, I know you don't believe that. So for the sake of argument, if one animal did become another animal, that distinction would require a cause. One animal being the same as another animal does not require a cause because they're the same animal. It's the distinction that requires a cause.
That's really interesting. So let's put it into practice. So someone finds in the ground what looks to be the bones of a camel, but it's smaller. So it's not actually a camel, but it's similar, right? Similar to a camel. Okay. Dirk, you're the one on the site. You actually recover the bones and you say, this looks like a camel. This must be the ancestor of this camel that we see today, right? It looks similar, right? It's smaller, but it looks similar. So you're going to posit this is an early form of this existing camel. That's what you're assuming might be the case.
Right. That would be my hypothesis.
No, I'm going to grant you that, even though that's actually not that's actually not a viable hypothesis. How do you determine whether or not the bones you found were actually the ancestor, a previous form of the camel, or just another animal that's similar to a camel?
Okay. So there'd be a variety of ways to do that. If there was any genetic material in the bones, which I'm assuming you're suggesting there wouldn't be. So you're probably suggesting based only on the visible elements of the bones, how would we conclusively determine that they are related to the same previous animal. Is that basically what you're asking?
The question is, you're assuming the thing you found is the previous type of animal that the camel came from. How would you know it's not that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, it is what a camel we are claiming evolved from. How would we know it is or is not?
Or it was just another animal that could have just as well lived alongside the current animal, but they're just similar.
How would we know whether or not that was the origin, or that was the point at which the animal split?
Oh, well, that's what you're assuming, that there's this trajectory of animal splitting. I'm asking you, how do you determine whether case A is that there's a previous animal that this one split from, or it's just another animal that could have just as well lived alongside the camel today? Because here's the other part of the hypothetical, Dirk, is let's say you found this bone structure that you thought was similar to a camel, and you were like, dude, this is crazy. We found an old type of camel that, maybe the old ancestor of this current camel. But let's say in Peru, at the base of a mountain in the middle of nowhere, a kid found the same exact bone structure, but it just happened to be the case in this hypothetical that he knew exactly what that was. It was a different type of thing that looked like a camel that was very much alive at the time, coexisting with the current camel. You don't know about Peru, though. You don't know about this. So you have to tell me how it's the case that you determined that this thing you found is a previous form of the current thing that you find similar.
Well, typically what anthropologists would do is they would look at the soil layers to determine whether or not the animals, let's say there was this animal that we're talking about, and it's under a certain soil layer, and then another soil layer on top of it shows this deviation you're talking about, a slight deviation in bone structure in the same region of basically the same type of animal eating the same types of foods. That points to this previous animal being the source.
No, it doesn't. You just inserted that, and you're basically, that's the thing you're trying to prove, which I'm asking, how do you determine that's not the case or it is the case? Your example is you look again and you assert the thing you're trying to prove. That's all you just did now. You're like, look at the soil and look at the similarities between the animals and their diets, and then you assume, again, the thing that Jimbob's asking you to differentiate, how you determine it is, in fact, a relative that's previous form that it split from, or it was just another animal that happened to die out that was similar, that could have just as well lived totally with the current camel. And
right,
you can't answer this question.
Well, no, I can. If the soil layer before this animal, we're looking at this animal. If there's not two animals, because if they're splitting into two different animals, if there's not two different animals in that area in older soil regions, then there is not that animal.
What? That doesn't answer the question, dude.
Because it is answering the
What's
question.
My question?
You're saying, your question is how do we know that they're not living side by side?
Methodology. Yeah, what's the methodology that the thing you found could just as well be dead? It could be totally gone and extinct, by the way. But if it had survived, it could have just as well lived alongside the thing that it's similar to. I'm asking you for the methodology that you're going to use to determine whether one case A is the case, which is the thing you're assuming that this is an earlier form that this current thing that's alive today split from, or it's a type of animal that's similar that just died out that just could have well lived alongside the current animal.
Okay. Because if it was living alongside the current animal, there wouldn't be a gap before its burial in the soil layer and then it existing again. It can't become extinct and then exist again.
Dude, nobody says it existed again. it goes extinct, right? Let me make this more simple for you. There's an animal similar to a cat. It looks like a cat. It's a similar bone structure as a cat, but it's a little bit different, right? But it died out, and you find the bones. And you go, that looks like a kind of a cat, but it's a little bit different, but it's a little bit the same. I'm asking you, when you find this extinct bone structure that you think is another group of a cat-like thing, how do you determine that the thing you found is the early ancestor of this new thing you're looking at that's similar, that it kind of morphed in or branched away from this thing, as opposed to it's a type of animal that died out that's similar to a cat?
Using only bones, because I could answer this question by saying they do it genetically now. So
yeah, but
genetic. But
no,
if you're asking strictly by bones,
no, because
right?
there's genetic, right? You're talking about genotype, right? Is there certain animals that have similar phenotype but dissimilar genotype? Yes, the answer is yes. It was rhetorical. But so the question of similar genotype, well, by that standard, we find similar microbiological structures in bananas as we find in humans. So does it follow we came from a banana because we share similar genetic structure?
Well, no, because we would have branched previous to that.
But yeah, But
we do share the same basic genetic component. Like all life contains the basic similar genetic components.
Does that follow that because life shares physical components that look similar and operate similar, that we all came from the same thing?
If we all have the same basic genetic building blocks, then it makes sense that the source is shared.
Well, yeah, but not. I would disagree with that. That's actually a logical jump. You don't have an argument for that. You're just saying like things that share carbon have a similar source because they have a similar structure. That's like saying like we're made of carbon, therefore we're from a star because there's stars and there's carbon in stars. That's not logical.
Well, I mean, we all are from a star.
Oh, really? How did you determine that we're from a star?
Well, because that's how like if you're talking about carbon and the elements being made in a.
How did you determine we came from a star?
That our elements come from stars?
No. You said we come from stars. How did you determine
and you were
that
talking
we came
about
from
the
a star?
carbon, and you were talking about the carbon, and carbon comes from a star.
No, dude, what are you talking about? Carbon can be found in stars, but so can iron and all sorts of things. That's what's claimed, right? The question is, how do you determine, because two things share similar micro like patterns or components, how did you jump from, why isn't it the case that a star didn't come from me?
Well,
using the same reasoning.
Because the star is bigger than you. Because
wow,
Dirk.
Bro.
Jimbob.
Are you really at this point? Because the star's bigger than me?
Jimbob, do you know how elements are made in stars? That at first it starts with helium, and then the nuclear forces turn it into.
What does that have to do with a human being?
Hydrogen.
What does that have to do with a human being?
Carbon, all the elements are made in stars.
How does a star make a brain?
The stars make the elements. It's not making a brain. It makes the elements.
A star made the elements, and then what? The star delivered the elements to Earth, and then they self-compiled and made a brain?
Well, see, I think you're being a little disingenuous now, because you know that nobody's saying that everything, like charges in molecules and stuff, these aren't random things. They link up according to their specific arrangement and charges. So it's not like a random sort of thing just thrown onto the ground and then, boom, there's a unicorn.
Well,
Like,
it has
you
to
know,
have,
that's not.
it has to have some sort of trajectory toward complexity, increased complexity.
Right, it does. It
Why aren't the
absolutely
stars
does have
getting
a
more
trajectory.
complex then?
Stars do not have the same. So stars are what is powering
Powering.
our life. Yeah,
Stars
our
are
life
powering
on
our
Earth.
life.
Yeah.
How's that? What does that mean? Stars are powering our life.
Well,
What is
we
this?
get
What is
most of our
what did
energy
you buy?
from
What did you buy a
photosynthesis.
what did you buy
we,
a Guardian Quantralescent or something?
well, are you not familiar with photosynthesis? Do I need to explain how
Yeah.
photosynthesis works?
Yeah. How did that emerge from just matter?
Through organization, through cellular
How did
organization,
how does no,
organization.
dude, you're not listening. You're in a haze. How does organization towards some sort of end, right, emerge from just matter itself?
Well, I'll tell you.
You'll tell me. I bet you will.
I will tell you. Tell you. So because I have lots of conversations with Christians, and so I had to get into what does life have that nothing else has? You know, what is so weird about life? What can we say is distinct about life? And one of the things that's distinct about life that shares qualities with some other things is that it's a buffer against entropy. It has a resistance against entropy. So you're right. When you say life moves towards more complexity, that's absolutely true. And so life represents a buffer towards entropy, and it's powered by the sun. In fact, all planets themselves represent some element of a buffer towards entropy because they accumulate more energy from the sun than they can give off absent the sun. So they're
I understand. You're saying that the sun just happens to be a power source for the Earth.
This guy stinks on ice.
And the power source for Earth, given what the Earth has, you're saying creates the circumstances and the conditions for whatever magical trick you're going to do, jumping from dead, inorganic, or non-living, I should say, to living. You're going to say that somehow that jump happened or whatever, okay? What we're talking about is whether or not the claim that a human, you and I, were once not like whatever we're calling this thing called a human, comes from totally not a human, right? That's what evolution would say, right? So I'm asking you, if something today exists, and you assume through the evolutionary non-theory that we as humans, we come from something that's not human, and I ask you, point to one thing that's not human that we come from, and how you determine that we came from it, you say similarities. But the problem with that, Dirk, is if you keep going back, and I did this during an evolution debate, I asked someone, didn't a cat come, according to evolution, didn't a cat come from something completely dissimilar to a cat? And they said yes. So if your argument for evolution is, look, this thing exists and a similar thing existed and it was dead, therefore the similar thing is related to the similar thing. But the problem with evolution is that as you go back and back and back, you have to argue the opposite. You have to argue also that dissimilar things along the way became human, let's say. So that means something completely dissimilar to a human back in the day, millions of trillions, a quadrillion, 4,000 million years ago, is the thing that eventually branched off and became thinking, rational beings who do philosophy. So that's the claim of evolution. And the point is, you can't take evolution through the scientific method from an observation. I've done this thousands of times with people. You start with the observation, things are similar, things are different. There's a variety of species, there's similarity in species. I go, great, that's an observation. What is it you're saying is causing that? Because that would be a proper viable hypothesis, is to say, what's causing the similarities and what's causing the variation, right? That's the question. That would be the scientific question. The problem is, whatever you say the answer is, you can't actually introduce it and remove it and test it.
Okay, so a lot of the people who explain evolution do so incorrectly. Evolution is not morphological distinction or morphological incompatibility. Now, before you start arguing, it is a sure sign that speciation has occurred. Evolution
It's question
is
begging.
speciation. Hold on, just let me explain what it is before.
Why should I let you question beg and assume the thing that's in question, right? You just like, hey, this thing is a sign of the thing I'm trying to prove. And I go, how?
Well, I'm just giving you a definition right now. I'm just giving you a definition we can work with, because you want one that we're not going to change. So I want to give you one that I'm not going to change. I'm going to stick by, okay? So the definition is speciation, and it is driven by, because you ask what's the mechanism that drives by, it is driven by reproductive isolation. So it doesn't have to be morphological incompatibility. It can be reproductive isolation.
Dirk.
That's what.
Yeah, you got a problem.
Is.
You got a problem. Reproductivity is something that you have to say.
Reality is reality. Boom. Christian's own epic Ben Shapiro style with facts, reason, and logic.
You're granting yourself reproduction as something that you already have as a mechanism. I'm sorry, but evolution would have to tell me how it produced reproductivity, like the compatible sexes, or even asexual, right? You have to then, you can't just grant yourself, there's a male giraffe and a female giraffe, and now we have a bunch of species. Look how it works. Isn't it amazing? No, you'd have to tell me, right, that that you're going to have to tell me how.
I will tell you right now, sexual reproduction. Do you want to hear?
What are you going to answer?
I'm going to tell you it started around 2 billion years ago.
How do you know that?
Because it did not
how do you know it started? No, I didn't ask. What? Okay, you know it happened 2 billion years because you know it didn't happen before that. You know how retarded that sounds?
Well, because again, what we're doing is we're digging through the layers of the earth where we know it's 2 billion years ago.
No, you don't know shit, dude. You don't know shit. You're just saying shit, okay? How do you know? Look, you just made an insane claim. I asked you, when is it that asexual animals became sexual with two compatible components, a penis and a vagina in this case? You said, we know it happened. No. We know it happened. What did I say before you called in, you guys? I said, when these questions come up, all they say is, we know it happened. You're not letting me talk, though.
You keep cutting me off.
How do you know that the splitting of the sexual
because they didn't have a penis and a vagina. What's happening is inside the DNA, when the DNA replicates, they can slip. It's called cross genetic horizontal slippage or something. Parts of the DNA can slip into another organism's DNA, and this is
how does that get you a dick?
Okay, so this is pre-sexual reproduction. Then what happens is, so what they're doing is they're trying to, it's self-regulating against mutation. And so what they do is the chains begin to add up so ridiculously long that they have to cut them down to half the size of their original DNA sequence. And then they slip in the other organism's DNA, and that's the first sexual reproduction. So it's not penis and vagina.
That doesn't tell me. That doesn't tell me how suddenly you have two sexes from random mutation.
Because they're slipping their genes across each other, and then they're cutting their genes in half and exchanging them.
That doesn't tell me how that produces a penis, dude.
So you asked what the origin of sexual and asexual reproduction was. So I'm explaining that to you. Now you're jumping to what is the origin of the penis and the vagina.
Well, they're related, right? Because if organisms could just replicate, and what you call asexual reproduction at the cellular level is just multiplicity of itself, right? And you don't need to outsource anything, right? You don't need to find a male or a female partner to bond and to do this dance to have procreation. You're going to have to Even if I granted you the thing you can never observe, that's 4 billion or whatever insane thing you said before, even if I granted this process, right, you'd have to explain how that actually occurs. But even if I granted that, you still have to use evolution as a mechanism to produce the two sexes from non-two sexes.
Well, right, because evolution is the mechanism that I just explained, where you have these sharing of the DNA. So that's the first example of sexual reproduction. That is the definition of sexual reproduction.
I already granted your asexual internal reproduction, what you just call like genetic multiplication, replication. It's just replicating, right? You're just saying there's replication that happens because that's what DNA does. It replicates, right? Okay, I'm granting you the first replicator, okay? I'm granting you that at the cellular level, there is the multiplication and self-replication. It doesn't require another sex. What I'm asking you is, under your paradigm that you're defending, called evolution, to get to where we are now, you have to tell me the mechanism and how you know it to be the case, where you went from asexual reproduction to male and female parts from random mutation.
Okay, so after the animals became multicellular, which is a gestalt. Okay?
How'd you get what? Wait,
which
what?
is just a community of cells.
Okay,
a community of cells. Just think of it as they make like a little community. Single cells make a community, and this community becomes a larger
hold on. Let me just. I just want to follow the chapters of your book here. What did I say earlier? They say these guys do chapters of book. They turn to the next chapter and they say, so now we skip to multicellular animals, okay? And we're supposed to go, oh, cool, you just totally jumped from single cell to multicell. That's awesome. I'm so glad you did that.
It's like Pulp Fiction, dude. Just come on, man.
So we just, so we just skip from single to, you just grant yourself the chapter change.
I'm granting myself a chapter. Now we're at jellyfish, okay? We fast forward.
Why not? Why not start with sharks?
We're jellyfish.
Why not start
we're not
with
at sharks?
Why not?
We're not at sharks.
Why not?
Because we're at jellyfish. We're jellyfish. And the jellyfish, they just do it in the water. They just squirt out their DNA into the water. Okay.
Yep.
So they don't need to have a body that holds it. It's not until we start getting into the land animals that we need to have.
How did you get land animals, bro?
All right. So,
dude, what did I say? Every time you talk to these people, hold on, Dirk. You're like a parody, bro. No, hold on. Let me talk to my audience for a second. Let me talk. Every time I ask these people these questions, they grant themselves the next big chapter change, like they're reading their kid a book. They go, and then we get land animals.
Land animals. Okay, we'll go. We'll
then there's an elephant.
We'll go back to the lungfish. Okay, the lungfish.
How'd you get that?
Now, the lungfish.
No, how'd you get that?
This is before land animals.
How did you get a lungfish, bro?
How do I get a lungfish?
Yeah. You just skip another chapter, bro?
Well, we've got to be fast, dude.
You got to be fast. Yeah, you got to be fast and deceptive.
Fast, dude. I'm trying to cram like 6 billion years into
I know. You're trying to cram a story that you have to invent on the spot because when I ask you, how do you get the change in the chapter? You go, let me switch a chapter. I go, no, Dirk. How did you get to the next chapter called There's a Lungfish Now? And you go, dude, you got to grant me that these animals exist first. And I go, no, because evolution needs to definitionally be the thing that you're arguing as a mechanism that produces this new thing called a lungfish. I don't grant you a lungfish. I don't follow your public education document where you can just draw in new animals.
But not a lungfish? Not a lungfish?
Yeah, I was being charitable that you can start. I'll grant you a whole new species, even though you shouldn't be granted that. You should be able to tell me from the evolutionary view what produces a jellyfish.
I did. They're basically Hydra, which is just a community of single-celled organisms.
Cool. How'd you get a lungfish?
Okay, so a lungfish. This takes a long time.
Does it? Like 6 billion years?
It's like hundreds of. We'll say
Yeah.
700 million.
Yeah, why not? Just totally arbitrary, made up. Why don't we say 791 million and just
You know what's
say...
interesting? I want to give you a quick factoid about the lungfish. The lungfish has like 500 million more, or 500 more, or 500 million more base pairs of DNA than humans do. So they have longer DNA chains than we do.
Uh-huh. So
you don't think that's cool or interesting that DNA goes
So red
up
herring, it doesn't matter because
in-
it doesn't tell me how you get a lungfish from not lungfish. How do you get an animal from not the animal, sir?
How do you get in? Okay, so this goes back to it's all driven by the female of the species. So
That's
speciation.
Dude, stop it! You can't start with the animal. I'm asking you. How do you get an animal from a non-animal? You're like, let me start with the animal.
So back to the jellyfish. So the jellyfish is a community of single-celled organisms. So they come together. Now that's an animal. Okay, a jellyfish is an animal. If you have more than 2 cells working together, and it's moving around, it's an animal.
Cool.
Okay? Is that cool?
That is cool. You've described and defined what an animal is. That's not what I asked. I said, how do you get an animal from a not that animal?
So through a distinction in selection of behavior.
Behavior of what? A previous animal?
Right. So
Cool.
so what you're asking the chicken and the egg, right? And you're
No.
saying, oh, the cat comes from a not cat or something like that?
No, a chicken and an egg are still tied to the same universal category called the chicken. So the question is, how do you get an animal from a not that animal, right? An egg comes from a chicken. So that's an example of a chicken coming from the animal, which is the only thing we see, by the way. I'm asking the question that you have to hold to, the proposition you have to hold to, which is there's an animal that actually comes from not that animal.
Right. And the first branch is going to look very similar. So the first branch isn't going to be like a penguin and an elephant. It's going to look like very similar animals.
I don't care about your
like
drawings, bro.
Like a dog and a wolf, for example.
I don't care.
A dog is a different species than a wolf.
Well, the dog and the wolf are still in the same category.
What do you mean by category? They're different species. That's
They're
what you're asking.
They're in the same category of felines, right? They're still derivative of the same category. I'm asking a different question. These are universal categories, okay? Right. You have to tell me, because I'm a human, right? And you're a human? We're not talking about a human that comes from
No. Hold on. See, oh man, this might get me kicked off. No, I'm not a human. You're not a human? Difference between a human and a sapiens. There's a huge difference between a human and a sapiens. A human is a sociological category.
That's amazing. So would every other category then?
No.
Oh, really?
Sapiens is a physical category.
No.
Human
categories
is
are not
sociological.
Dude,
it's like a behavioral category.
No, Dirk. Categories are metaphysical. They're not physical. We categorize things. Humans categorize things. Like species, by the way. Did you know that under the evolutionary view, Dirk, even the term species doesn't actually exist? It's arbitrary based on a frame of time. Because here's why. Because when I ask you, is it true that from the evolutionary view, you, the humanoid, the whatever you want to call yourself as a category, came from not that category? And you have to say yes.
Yes.
So what's the thing that humans came from that is no longer in the category of human?
Okay, this will be fun. So humans come from what is the sapiens, which is before the sapiens, right? Now, there was a bottleneck. This is the out of Africa thing, somewhere around, I think it's Morocco, northeastern Africa.
Uh-huh.
And humanity diverged. And part of it went north into
that's a great
Europe.
story. I don't need the story, right? What I'm trying to get to is now that you have a category that's not a human, but it's similar to a human, right? In Africa, in the story.
Right.
I'm asking a different question. Now that thing you're calling kind of human, but not really, right? Before you get into the story of the branching into where we are now, you need to tell me from the evolutionary view what that thing was before it became itself.
So that is like, I think they call it like Lucy or something like that. So it's not a human. It's just it's a sapien with a different behavior. So we started with a different behavior.
Dude,
so this is
you're
what
not
I'm
listening, Dirk. You're not listening. Okay.
Okay. Maybe I just don't understand.
I'm saying sapien is a category from the evolutionary view. The sapien, the earliest sapien you're trying to call Lucy or whatever, needs to come from not sapien. So I'm asking you, what is the thing that's not sapien that Lucy came from?
So it's most likely I think it was like a chimpanzee or a bonobo.
And then
it looks like that.
Okay, cool.
So it looks like that, but
dude,
a bonobo and a human don't exist at that time.
Hold on. Stop.
Go ahead.
So there's something that you're using similarities, and you're assuming something similar to a bonobo existed. I'm asking you a different question. What is it that the bonobo used to be that's nothing like the bonobo? What is it?
Yeah.
Because you have to eventually get back to a point, Dirk, where the thing that comes from another thing comes from something that's so dissimilar that you would never even assume they were similar. But you have to assume that for evolution, because you can't just keep going back with similarities and not keep going back and say, well, what was before the bonobo that looked kind of like a bonobo but wasn't really, right? And then you keep going back, right?
It looks different. They all look slightly different. Yeah, and if you keep going back, they're going to start looking very, very different. You're absolutely right. So as the branches go back, they absolutely start looking different than the later branches.
I know, dude.
So the more...
Dude, I know what you're claiming, right? You're just describing what you're claiming. I'm asking a question. How do you know what the thing was before the bonobo that wasn't a bonobo and didn't look anything like the bonobo, but you're claiming it came from that?
Well, it did look a lot like the bonobo. I mean,
dude. Oh my gosh, dude. It's like talking to a wall. Eventually, it has to come from something that doesn't look at all like the thing. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So the evolution proponent says, all humans came and all organisms came from these smaller organisms that today would never look, you would never say they are the same. They're completely different. We came from a fish, right? Given enough time, the process became something like a fish, right? That's what I'm asking you. This is why evolution itself, being a modern innovation, by the way, is so selective in where it tries to draw out its storyline, right? It relies on deep time, which you can't observe any of it, and it relies on a bunch of assumptions you can't observe, but it also relies on something that's even more nefarious, which is it isolates humans and similar things that look similar to a human, like chimps and apes and monkeys and shit like that. And they go, let's talk about evolution from this framework. But when someone like me asks a question outside of the time frame framework of okay, you're saying we came from chimps, so we're so similar, we look similar and we do similar gestures, therefore we came from that similar thing. Well, I'm asking a different question. If evolution was true, even the chimp that looks similar to us and acts similar, right, would need to come from something eventually that was dissimilar, right? That's the claim. The problem is you can't tell me the methodology that's going to determine which
monkey come from fish,
which specific animal category the chimps came from.
When did pond scum evolve into a living, breathing creature?
Yeah, when did pond scum evolve into a living, breathing creature? Well, I told you, Marcus, when you ask people like Dirk these questions.
2 billion years ago.
Yeah, they make up shit.
I said 2 billion years ago.
You just make up a story.
I didn't make that up.
Yeah, you did.
Make that up.
Yeah, you did. Who verified it was 2 million and not 3?
It's billion. It's billion.
Great, billion. Yeah, cool, right. What's the margin of error, Dirk?
Plus or minus like 500 million.
Okay, and how do you determine the margin of error of the margin of error?
Margin of error is statistics, so that's a completely different.
Listen. You say
that's
it's
like
for
2.5%.
Dude, just stop. You're not listening. When I ask you how long ago, you say quadrillion million, and I go, what's the margin of error? You're like 500 million billion, right? And I go, how do you know that's the margin of error? What you like, for instance, you need a margin of error for that, for knowing how wrong you are about the margin of error, but you don't have that because it's all assumptions.
Because margin of error is usually exclusive of the outliers beyond 2.5% of each side of the data set.
Right.
So it would clearly be plus or minus 5%.
And so you have access to the data set of 4 billion years ago?
Well, that's just generally how they do it. So you're asking what the margin of error is. It's generally plus or minus 5%.
Yeah, and what's the margin of error of that being the margin of error? Or is it just arbitrary?
What do you mean margin of error?
Look, dude, when we look, dude, when I run a manufacturing company and there is hold on. When I run a manufacturing company and I practice manufacturing, I can determine the margin of error. Hold on.
I gotta go, dude. Okay. I gotta go, bro. Okay. I gotta go. I'll call back. I'll call back.
Unbelievable, dude.